All right. Welcome back. This is The Joy of Medicine. And we've got an interesting topic today because it kind of springs off of what this show is about, is trying to bring back spirituality and faith to medicine. And one of the aspects that I think that I've seen before with doctors, and I may have mentioned this once before, but I remember probably 20 years ago in a meeting with a group of doctors, and a doctor who I'm still friends with, made the comment that death is our enemy. And I remember thinking, well, that's kind of hopeless. I mean, if death is your enemy, then you lose, that war 100% of the time. You may not, you may win a battle or two, but death is coming, right? Death and taxes. It is October, so
that's right.
so taxes. But death is something, and one of the things that has been interesting, because I've got a good friend. Well, I mean, an old friend. I wouldn't say he's a good friend, but who wrote a book on this topic, and I know, Dad, that you've been reading some on.
And very interested in it in the past. Actually, I've had some patients to tell me to talk about it.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that, but it's about near-death experiences and what happens when people actually die on the table. They're, as I understand it, in the cases that are measured, they've been called, what's that, a coded or whatever.
Right. It's over.
It's over, and then something happens, and they come back, and anyway. I think it speaks to the fact that there's something beyond this, and death is not really our enemy. It's something we have to deal with. Really, it's what happens after death. It's the end, right? I mean, that's for eternity, a little bit longer than the short period of time that we're down here. So I know, Dad, that you had kind of been looking at a couple of things.
This book, this is a good book if people want to read it. I don't think you can share the line.
Fingerprints of God. Barbara Bradley.
Yeah. Haggerty.
Yeah.
She was a New York Times bestseller, but she went at this from a scientific standpoint.
Right.
And it is amazing. These experiences, people, doubt them. And there's a lot of doubt and controversy about these near-death experiences, and people, the people that are the materialistic, nothing, that's just brain firing off, and that really didn't happen. This book gives some absolutely amazing true issues to discuss about it, and so I think that's what I'd like to talk about, is some of the medical aspects of these near-death experiences that are. Yeah.
So let's start with how do you determine somebody has died?
Yeah. Well, there's brain waves, which is a way. When the brain waves quit, that it's all over.
Yeah. Are they measure? They measure?
Can actually, and they're in certain types of surgery. It's a part of the thing, particularly like when they're doing carotid surgery for the artery supply in the brain stuff. They have EEGs running continuously, just like an EKG, and so there are the situations where that occurs. And so that there are times when some disasters occur, and you have brain waves.
So what? I don't know if.
So the
answer. What does a brain wave measure? Just activity of the brain.
Electrical activity in the brain, just like the heart has electrical activity. All human cells and whatever have an electrical potential that's going off, and like the heart, the pacemaker is an electrical stimulus that makes the heart beat. So when somebody's dead, their heart electricity quits. There's no more. There's no more firing of the heart, and the brain, because of circulation, there's no more activity there either. So those are the issues. And for instance, like in transplant surgery, when they have a donor that's there, they have to determine that the person is dead. And so you can still breathe for them, and you can artificially pump the heart blood around until the organ that's going to be used, when in my case was involving the heart, that the person is actually dead.
They're dead, but you're keeping it pumping so that you can keep it in good shape, so that when you can move it over to transfer it over.
Person is alive, and you can do that. And we talked about a guy named Marshall, which was back several radio shows ago, who actually had 2 transplants.
Right.
You know, and he was an amazing guy. But the point is that they're gone. In other words, and these episodes that have occurred are amazing stories. For instance, one I remember in I think it's in this book. I've read so much about it, I can't remember exactly where some of these are. But it was a car accident, and the guy is when they're gone, he is up above the scene, so he can see the car wreck, and he can see himself there. And then there's usually a typical pattern that they experience a bright light. And they, depending on how long they're out, they may actually venture into the light.
Right.
And then when they do, the things that's amazing is they have this amazing feeling of calm. You'd think that it's something that would result in a death, and obviously they realize what's happening. They're totally calm. They actually have a feeling that is, I guess, very peaceful is the thing is to really describe. And yet they can see things. And the amazing thing is, I think you had mentioned earlier, you had read something about like a blind person.
Yeah, no. So this friend of mine that wrote it, I think it's called Imagine Heaven, a guy named John Burke. He's a New York Times bestseller for that book. Just to give him credit, as I read that, he actually came and spoke to a group of people that we were reading the book. And one of the stories that he recounts is this young girl who, blind from birth, never has seen, is dead, and comes back to life after that, and then is able to kind of, even though her sight is still gone, is able to tell what people were saying, where they were able to like say, well, he was wearing a blue. She's never seen blue before, right. to even know what blue looks like. But she had an awareness of the colors of the things that were going on, and were able to tell the people that were operating on her, you know, what they said. I mean, all kinds. So there was some awareness post. These were things that happened after she was pronounced dead by the doctor.
Yeah, and that's happened in many cases they describe things that you can't have a connection to. For instance, in many of these experiences, people are, let's say they're in a hospital, and there have been reports of this, and so they see themselves looking down at the operating table, and they can see things that are going on in the room that they wouldn't know what this is. This machine came in, this did this. This doctor came in and did that. And then even crazier, they sometimes drift out of the operating room, and they're going down the hall, and things are happening in the hospital. And maybe not even in that area of the hospital. Somebody's coming into the hospital with and they see the people, and they talk about it. I saw this happen. And in fact, they look back, well, guess what? It did happen.
Well, so that's one of the arguments to say it's not. I mean, we're already saying brainwaves have stopped. There's nothing materially from the body standpoint that is saying that, but this is not like they're having some dream. This is they're recounting actual events that there's no way. I mean, it would be amazing if they hadn't died and they were sitting on the table and they woke up and said, "Hey, this was going on in another room," right? I mean, that would be in and of itself.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll recognize people that they've seen. So and so came in, like their relative came into the hospital, and they see them and they know they're there, and they describe, well, so and so came in while I was in this condition. It's people have wondered about this, and question is why. And I think a good example, one of the things that I read about in this book, The Fingerprints of God, you know, the nuns that are cloistered nuns that spend their whole life praying.
Right.
They're very wonderful and unusual people in the sense that they've done that.
Right. They've given up their any other sort of secular life.
And guess what? When you do an EEG on them, their EEG is different than yours and mine.
Oh, wow.
I'm not a EEG specialist, but there's a characteristic EEG that humans have, a normal wavefront. Well, these people have a different EEG. And so you wonder what's going on with the EEG when the people go away. In other words, in this, they've gone out of the system. Yeah, they're pronounced out of the system. Their EEG stops. So it's not, well, what's happened? Going back to the nuns I was talking about, they have a characteristic EEG that of meditative. Well, guess what? If you take a person that has had a near-death experience, they're not a nun, they may have never prayed or whatever. You do an EEG on it, and it matches the EEG of the contemplative nuns.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there've actually been several studies showing that, so that in fact their brain changes with this.
Wow.
And in fact, how does that translate in their life? The people that come back from these experiences, if it's like obviously a changing experience because of the near-death experience, but the fact is they actually become, in most cases, very spiritual people.
Right.
So that if you have the brainwave of a nun, maybe you're like a nun. I don't know that, but the fact is they do know that the brainwave is similar. And remember, we said the brainwave is different from a contemplative nun versus you and me.
Right. Wow. Yeah, so I think that one of the things that, speaking of the joy of medicine, is, if you have an outlook that says death is the end, they stop existing, and we have these near-death experiences that are unexplainable, but there are multitudes of them. I mean, I talked to my friend John, and he said, Trey, there's thousands and thousands of reports that are unexplainable by anything other than something happened that science cannot explain. I think that brings joy to know, okay, death isn't the end. That person goes on. It doesn't make it any less when mom died, terribly sad, right? But on the flip side, as you've mentioned before, she said, well, think about what's going on, what's going on afterwards.
And that's helped me a lot. She made the comment, we knew she was dying of cancer, and we'd been together since age 17, and we knew she was going to die in the near future from this cancer. And so she was afraid, well, how am I going to react to this? What's going on? And she sat down with me one day. I remember she said, look, what I want you to do is think about what I'm doing, not what you're doing. If you think about what I'm doing, I'm going to be with our relatives, be with God. It's going to be a wonderful situation. I'm going to be very happy. Beautiful place. So don't think about what you're doing. Think about what I'm doing. And I've told that story to many patients that have experienced similar things and they're worried about death. Well, as you mentioned when you start off today, death is not our enemy. It is
definitely something. It's a result of our fall. Yeah. But as St. Paul says, death, where is your victory? Where is your sting? Right.
Exactly.
I mean, and so it's saying, that came to us because we sinned and we're sinners. And so the wages of sin is death, Paul says in Romans. But he later says in 1 Corinthians, oh, death, where is your sting? Where's your kind of taunting, death in the way he does that. And I think that's the Christian worldview that needs to be brought back into medicine, understanding that we're going to do everything we can. This doesn't mean we want to foster death.
Exactly.
But that's not what medicine's role is.
We have a lot to do here. And in fact, God may have a purpose for the person.
Right.
So that his purpose may not be carried out if that person leaves.
Right.
And so, I do believe all humans, God gives them a purpose that they need to do.
Right.
And so you may not have accomplished that purpose. You may think you have. You may have accomplished it. So obviously, physician's job is to try and prolong that life as best they can. But when you lose it, when the life is gone, people need to realize, and that's what Pam was trying to tell me was, look, and she had great faith. She said, if you get sad, don't get sad.
Right.
Think about me. What am I doing?
Right.
And in fact, that has helped me and helped many patients.
But I think that's part of what has to be brought up. Death is part of the healthcare process. And I mean, it's part of human life. Death is a natural, maybe from a theological standpoint, it's not the way God designed it from the beginning, but because sin entered, death came into being. We part our souls part from the matter that we know when we're alive as our body, and that there's something that happens after. And therefore, I think that's why it's really important not to just focus on let's keep them alive. I think part of healthcare, I'm not saying the doctors necessarily have to do this, but they've got to be open to do it, is to prepare somebody to die, right?
Right.
I mean, sometimes it happens suddenly, but oftentimes, like Mom, she knew 7 months. It was 5 to 9 months or something she was going to be given from the time she was diagnosed. And what's scary about those, the cancer doctors, I mean, short of miracles, when they say it's in that window, it typically
it's pretty much in that window.
Pretty much in that window. So preparing for death, and I saw my mom do it. I saw my mom, your wife, prepare. I mean, say things that needed to be said.
Well, she has profound faith. And so in dealing with a patient that doesn't have faith, it's always extremely difficult, or families that don't have faith, extremely difficult, because it's the end.
Right. Yeah.
In fact, with somebody that has great faith, it's not the end. It's the beginning of a new life.
It's the beginning of the rest of your life,
eternity,
right?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
it's the beginning of and that is a concept that is so, as a physician, so nice to have a strong, faith-filled family, that when this thing is going to happen, you're doing everything you can to prevent it from happening. But when it does happen, it's much easier to deal with.
Right. And again, also there's, since we know people are going to die, and you can do everything in your power as a physician to do it, and at some point there's nothing more you can do. You can help with suffering or pain or whatever, but I mean, that's just helping with the symptoms that are occurring as a result of it, but not really addressing the fact that this person's going through a death process. I think it's important for it to be brought back into the equation for doctors and healthcare workers across, to that are in touch with those people to do it. I think I've brought this up before, but there's more going on than we realize. I remember vividly my grandmother, Mom's mom, dying. As Mom, you figured out. So my grandmother had a stroke, and she was dying, and she couldn't speak or anything. And you had kind of realized that this was probably pancreatic cancer, and she had gone, and it had been diagnosed right prior to her dying. And I remember you leaving, and I stayed there with Mom and Stephanie and probably Trevor as well at that time. And you said, just given what we know, she's probably got a day or two. Well, like 3 days go by. You're like, there's no way. Well, my wife, Stephanie, who is in the hospice arena, said to my mother, is there anything you haven't told her that you need to tell her? She said, well, she's unconscious. And she goes, no, but I'm telling you, is there anything? And I said, well, Mom, she asked about the wires that you had. I mean, you could tell
she was pain. She had a stimulator because
the pain. She was asking about that. So she had no idea about the cancer. And Stephanie said, you need to go tell her that you have cancer and it's okay, or whatever. You need to tell her what you didn't tell her, because you kind of dismissed when she was asking about it. And so mom goes back, it talks to an unconscious person, and within 30 minutes she died because mom said, it's okay, you can go. So there's something that's going on now. That person, she wasn't dead at that point, but the fact that there are things that maybe need to be said, and realizing that while somebody may be unconscious or at the point of death, that we still can talk to them and still comfort them when they don't look like they necessarily need to be comforted.
Right. And it's the other thing I think related to this, which is a little bit down a different street or different alley, when people are in this phase, they very frequently see family members
right
that have died long ago.
Right.
And in fact, they talk about things that they would, in other words, the person is experiencing the near-death experience is told by somebody in their conversation with prior existing people that they would have never known.
Right. I think there was a book written, and I cannot remember the name of it. And there was a movie that was done about a young child who had a near-death experience. And I think the father was even a Christian pastor, and comes back, and he's really struggling with faith, and he starts talking to the child starts saying, I talked to, and like names the name, and they're like, well, that's, so they just take out a old picture album and start flipping through, and they point at the person as an old person and say, is this the person you talk to? Because that's who you say. And they said no. So they start flipping through, and they're flipping by, and he says, that's the one. Well, it's like him when he was 25 in terms of that. No, that's who I talked to. And it's actually that person, but was not saying the first person they ran across. It was it made it even more evident that something had happened there, where they met somebody who had died long before them, but then when they met them, they actually were in a different physical looking state than what people remembered at the end of their lives.
And it's interesting too, some strange things like related to miscarriages. Some people have had near-death experiences, and they're visiting with people, and they meet their sister.
Yeah, well, that yes,
that never made it out of the uterus.
That's funny, because in that same movie, he said, I met my sister. Well, they had never told him that she had had a miscarriage. Mm-hmm. The child had no idea, and said, I met my sister. And they're like, you don't have a sister. I said, well, I met my sister. And then they start like, oh, wait a second. We did, but it was actually, instead of a in the womb baby, was actually a child that he had talked to about, you're my brother. And those are things you can't explain either. I think it's really hopeful. I mean, I think it's a cause for joy that I think people who focus just on death as the enemy, and I've lost when I can't save somebody, that I think over time, if that's the only way you look at it, I would think you wouldn't have the same outlook.
Well, and it's interesting. My grandfather, who I've never met, he died long before I was born, but he told my mother he was building a house for the family, which is probably biblical. Yes. And he said, so you've got a room, just come on.
Right. Well, so the last words I remember my grandfather saying to me was, I'm going to go prepare a place for us, which is, of course, what Jesus said. Those are the last words I remember him saying, but other than I love you.
Right.
And again, the cool thing is a lot of people think, well, this is just, you're trying to talk yourself into something more, but we're now given evidence that shows that's unexplainable from scientific purposes, from the mere body, if the brain waves aren't working, then it can't be a brain. And if even if it was brain waves, they can't be telling you something that happened down the hall.
Or out of the hospital,
or mention people that they've seen, or mention people that they meet that they don't even, there wouldn't be any way that they would know. Yeah. So it's actually real people or real events that they're witnessing separate from their body that kind of gives us, I don't know if it's scientific or what, but it's more than just anecdotal, because you can't explain what's going on, but what's going on is real because they're actually recounting either real people or real events that they have no way of knowing.
Like they're out of their body and they can see like an ambulance coming in to the hospital. They can see that happening. And in fact, time-wise, it works out. One of the things which I wanted to mention too is many people that have had these experiences see Jesus.
Right. Yes.
And there have been people to describe and paint pictures, actually been people that have painted pictures of what he looked like. And it's amazing the similarities of the pictures.
Right.
And also the thing that's amazing is the absolute, I guess we talk about joy, the joy of that experience is mind-boggling. They said you can't, the joy, the brightness of the light, the happiness, the joy that they're experiencing when they meet Jesus.
Well, so one of the things that I do recall in Imagine Heaven is also a guy who was an atheist and was self-admitted not a good guy. and plenty of other people that he had come in contact would say, no, you weren't. You were a jerk or worse. And he meets Jesus, and here's something that there is peace originally, but then I've also heard he begins to see his life go before him, all the bad things that he had done, still loved by Jesus, but actually gets pointed in the direction of, here's what you spent your life doing, and starts to go, there are people to come get him, presumably to take him to hell. And he begs for mercy. And then that's when he comes back to life. And now he's out preaching.
He's a preacher now.
He's a preacher now, saying it's important what we do on this side of the curtain.
Well, and that's the thing that you mentioned in there. There are people that have bad experiences with these near-death experiences. And it sounds like this guy did. But it is so terrifying, the bad experiences, that when they come back, there's a dramatic conversion in their life.
Right, and this guy completely changed his life. Like apologize. I went back and apologized to everybody that he ever hurt, and had, like he said, had a vivid remembrance, like almost seeing the stuff that he had done, and even the impact on other people, in a way that was just flashing before his eyes, which again would speak to a last judgment, right? I mean, like when you die, you're gonna be confronted with what'd you do with your life. The thing that I liked about it was Jesus still loved him. I mean, it wasn't, but it was after that initial response of love that was like, you've got somewhere else to go. And that's when he started to actually see the scary side of it, that's when he begged for mercy, and Jesus, in his way, I believe, Jesus in his mercy said, okay.
Well, remember we talked a couple of weeks ago about divine mercy.
Right.
About Faustina, Saint Faustina, and whatnot. That in fact, Jesus is a very merciful person, and in fact, that there should be no fear of him. Right. You know, if you've done things wrong, just change your life.
Right.
He's willing to forgive you and proceed forward.
And then I don't know, you know more about what Faustina wrote, but as I recall, I mean, Jesus said, if you just call on my mercy.
Yeah, that's the Divine Mercy Chaplet, which is a prayer that Jesus had her write down.
Right.
So he's telling her what to write. She wrote down this chaplet. And the fact is, if this was said if the sins are like scarlet, they're horrible sins. And they said this chaplet one time before they died, that rather than being a just judge, I'll be a divine mercy, merciful God that welcomes you into the situation. And they may be going, Catholics, we talk about purgatory,
right?
But they made the cut, so
right. And I think that's important to remember too. As I mentioned before in an earlier show, when my father-in-law was dying, I had just kind of come across the divine mercy deal, and I had read about, because he was dying and was not conscious, had a horrible lung cancer, and it was totally metastasized. I mean, he was on his way out, and I said, well, you might want to say this in his presence. And this is, again, pointing to the fact that somebody has to do that. Well, she didn't feel comfortable doing it. She accidentally left her purse. She said, I didn't remember leaving my purse. So we get down with my mother, with my mother-in-law. This is her talking, to get in the car, and I go, oh, I left my purse. Just wait here. And so she goes back up to get her purse, and there's a nurse in there. And the nurse says, would you like to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet? And so they prayed the Divine Mercy right prior to his dying in his presence. And again, that's a healthcare worker that made it easier for her to do it. And also, I think, a providential God intervention that she forgot her purse, that she'd have to go back there. So, because she said she had prayed, give me the opportunity to pray this, but I don't feel comfortable doing it with these people. And for the nurse to actually take a moment to say, would you like to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet with your dad and I?
And that's interesting. Faustina was told by Jesus, actually, and it's a long book you can read, that's all the things. She wrote them all down, that this can work even if you're not next to the person.
Right.
And there are many occasions when Faustina was told by her, probably her guardian angel or Jesus, that somebody was dying miles away. She knew somebody was dying and may have the name or whatever. So she would say the chaplet until she felt better.
Wow.
And she knew her guardian angel say, basically, it's okay.
Right. But like I said, I don't know. I don't even know if Stephanie knows who this nurse was. Could have been, an angel, but certainly as a nurse, I think that we have to be, I'm not a nurse, but I'm talking about as healthcare workers, we have to kind of be open to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, to be willing to say something that would not normally be said, in order, because you don't know the impact you might have by just offering. She didn't say, I'm going to, or let. She said, would you like to? And
I think that if everybody has questions, we were talking about this book, I think you can see that, hopefully.
The fingerprints of God.
It's an amazing book.
Yeah, so
and it's well documented, and how they've gone to find these things. So I would recommend somebody reading that.
So again, this is the joy of medicine, and I think what we're talking about here is really important. Do not be afraid to incorporate your spirituality and help people kind of bridge the gap. Death, where is your victory? Where is your sting? Needs to be kind of the mentality behind Christian healthcare workers, and then be open to trying to reach out to other people, even just by offering, not imposing, just offering. And I think joy will flow from that.
Will flow.
All right. So thanks again for listening. We'll be back soon, and God bless you, and God bless your day. Bye.